In one of the videos I made this morning, I was mentioned in passing the kind of relationship between metaphors and dreams. And it was really just a kind of off-the-cuff remark, really, in relation to something I've been thinking about, well, some time ago actually, but I thought it might be worth revisiting to see if I can get my thoughts straight about it. I guess what I'm thinking about in relation to dreams is the relationship between three things: dreams, the imagination, and non-conscious cognitive processes, with particular emphasis on conceptual metaphors, or how conceptual metaphors play out in those three domains. In terms of non-conscious processes, if there is any validity at all in embodied cognition and the relationship between embodied cognition and conceptual metaphors, then a lot of non-conscious processes, non-conscious cognitive processes, involves the wielding, manipulation, mobilization of various metaphors. This is the relatively standard stuff that comes through, particularly Lakoff and Johnson, but all the rest of the material to do with conceptual metaphor theory, which is that because we are embodied beings with an evolutionary adaptive history designed for particular purposes, the cognitive machinery that we have was initially designed by those processes to cope with the demands of being a medium-sized object moving at medium speed, as Dawkins puts it, and having these particular kind of sensory organs, sensory motor relationships with the environment. So our brains, if you like, have evolved to organize the world in certain ways. And we might call those things perceptions, and we might act upon those perceptions. The clever trick, which Steven Pinker talks about really well, actually, I think, in terms of human development and perhaps other kinds of development, is that we seem to be able to have taken some of those structures, some of those structured perceptions that we have, perceptions to do with space and how things organize themselves in space, for example, and kind of empty them of content and then restock them with abstract content. So we're able to think about abstract concepts. We're able to perform cognitive procedures on abstract concepts by mapping those concepts onto the structures formerly occupied by completely concrete embodied experiences. So when we think about time, which is an abstract concept, we think about it by taking what we know of space and the various inferences and entailments that spatial extension has, and then drop time onto that framework. Okay, so that's the origins, or the broad understanding of that, as I get it at least, that a lot of non-conscious processing about abstract concepts is inherently metaphorical by produce this mapping process. It's completely non-conscious, and so in the same way that when I'm looking around, I'm not consciously thinking about how the space around me is organized, structured. Similarly, when I'm thinking about abstract concepts like time, again, I'm not thinking about how that concept is structured, unless I particularly put my mind to it. Most of that, the organization of that concept, takes place behind the scenes in the kind of darkness of non-conscious processing world. So what's the relationship to that? Okay, so a lot of non-conscious processes involves the wielding and manipulation of metaphors and metaphorical structures. Imagination, as I get it, also involves a lot of that kind of processes. And by which, when I talk about imagination, I don't just mean like dreaming things, imagining things that aren't real. You know, I look at a branch and I kind of imagine a squirrel sitting on that branch. Yes, I can do that. I'm really talking about imagination being a kind of generative process by which new ideas and new possibilities present themselves. And about how, in conversation with another human being, just through the use of this heavily metaphorical language and the metaphorical cognition which stands behind that language, we can form kind of inquiry-based imaginative acts collectively. I've heard these referred to as engines of inquiry, and how mixing metaphors can be and provide a kind of engine of inquiry. So I'm using imagination there as a kind of generative term for our ability to engage in blue sky thinking and thinking out of the box and all those kind of cliches, which are ultimately, as I say, metaphorically based, even though we don't think about the fact that they are metaphorically based while we're doing it. So the third thing about that Holy Trinity is this thing of dreams. And here I'm completely speculating, I have no idea if what I'm saying has any basis in fact. But one of the things I find quite interesting about dreams is that, or quite tantalizing as a possibility with dreams, is maybe what's happening during those processes is that we're kind of glimpsing the mechanisms. Is that these various metaphors which are constantly at play in the non-conscious parts of our mind, and which, in a completely routine way, underpin everything we say, including words like underpin. Maybe when we're dreaming, kind of the sluice gates open a little bit on that imagery. So instead of it being non-conscious, instead of it being just a kind of invisible generative tool for imaginative engagement, we can kind of experience it, we can kind of witness it firsthand. So all those metaphors like underpin suddenly become real pins that appear underneath things. And all these ideas that we have wide awake do with understanding appear in dreams as things standing underneath other things. And all these spaces that we kind of generate in order to be able to talk about time suddenly appear as real spaces. Strange sort of landscapes. A bit like Solaris in that film with not the George Clooney one, the original Tarkovsky one, where the kind of dreams and imagination that he has takes concrete form. Maybe in our dreams we live in Solaris.